Hello, everybody. Happy Thursday. Of course, Norwich City, 2 long trips this week already, back at home on Sunday. Middlesbrough, the visitors. Going to be a difficult test, of course. A good win for those guys last night against Sheffield United, who have obviously suffered back-to-back defeats in recent games. It's been a busy week, so there's lots to get through in this show. Adam Harvey, joined by Connor Southwell. Connor's going to be Jack Wilshire, Delia and Michael, football, loads of stuff to get through. But I think the place to start is probably Tuesday night, Deepdale. 2-2 draw. I mean, after sort of 12 minutes, I felt we were in for quite a long night. We both sort of turned to each other, and it was almost Oxford levels in terms of just a capitulation and defensively all over the shop. Obviously, errors at the back. And even at 45 minutes on the clock, I probably didn't see the comeback that they had. You know, the spirited effort of the lads to come from behind. Shane Duffy's amazing finish and sort of run. I think it's been well documented on socials in recent days. What did you sort of make of that response? And probably a good point on the road in the end.
Yeah, I think so. Probably one of those that I think with time and with a little bit of distance to it will probably feel a lot better than it did. Maybe even today, but definitely yesterday. I think travelling back and I actually felt Kenny McLean summed it up quite well, where there probably is frustration because a lot of what Norwich did in that opening 12 minutes was self-inflicted, and it was about not quite getting details right and whatnot. But then I think you have to be majorly encouraged by the way that they responded. I think NCFC Numbers put out a stat that it was the first time in something like 19 years, since 2005, I think it was Coventry, that Norwich came from 2 goals down away from home to rescue a point. So that's really significant, I think, in terms of a moment. And those are the type of results actually that can bind you a little bit closer together. But yeah, it was a 7:45 kickoff, and Norwich didn't turn up until 8 o'clock. So maybe that's an indication that they need slightly later ones. But yeah, look, I think nobody should underestimate as well how difficult a place Deepdale is to go at this moment in time. Paul Heckingbottom has got them really well drilled. I don't think they conceded a goal before the opening day of the season at home. And there was that positivity and sort of energy that I think you could sense around Preston because of the job that Heckingbottom has done in terms of stabilising them. They're taking, I think, 7 points from the last 3 games. So they were really informed. So maybe it wasn't a huge surprise. But yeah, the disappointment is, I think, that eradicate that 12 minutes, and it was a game that Norwich City probably shaded on the whole. But I probably walked away from it, and I spoke to people at the Preston end and at the Norwich end as well, and everyone sort of came to the same conclusion, which was a point was a fair result. So yeah, for me, how we reflect on these last 2 games, Stoke and Preston and the 2 draws, is largely probably based on what the outcome is on Sunday, because suddenly you win and you're talking about 5 points from a possible 9. And I think most people would have shaken your hand at the start of the week for that, given off the back of internationals and 2 long away trips, as you mentioned. So I think basically how we reflect on this week is going to be set by how Sunday goes against a Middlesbrough team that, although their league position maybe doesn't suggest so, I think are one of the best in the Championship. So it's going to be a really significant test for Norwich this weekend, I think.
Yeah, it felt like they probably missed Marcelino Nunez on Tuesday night, and kind of what he brings to that midfield. You know, this season he's kind of stepped up a different gear in terms of his contribution. Johannes went for Marcondes from the start the other night. That was his first start in a Norwich City shirt. I mean, what did you sort of make of his performance in that role? And were you surprised it was Marcondes? You know, we spoke a lot around maybe Svartau and Forson and loads of other players, Forsyth, loads of different options, but he went with Marcondes. And yeah, I mean, he sort of had good moments in the game and maybe difficult spells where that fitness level was sort of quite evident to see, I felt.
Yeah, and it was always going to be tough. I think it was probably a bit of an eyebrow raiser, really, because you look at sort of the football that he's played in terms of, I think it was 10 minutes, if not less, against Hull. It was, I think, about 26 minutes against Stoke, to then be thrown in from the start and to go about 60 minutes, which is what he did in the end. That's a really significant ask. I felt it was more, and I think we saw this in terms of the pattern of substitutions that Johannes Hoftorp made. It was more about using his squad in the best way. So, you know, Forsyth came on, who we've not seen for a little while, but wasn't involved in that game on Saturday against Stoke. We saw Kate Gordon as well, who wasn't involved at Stoke. We saw players who maybe hadn't been embedded in the weekend's game and maybe could add a level of freshness to it. But I thought he did okay. I thought there were some signs, and there was a moment particularly that stands out in my head in the first half where Norwich had got the ball on the edge of the box and they were working it quite nicely. And he went for quite an audacious chip over the back 4. And seeing that, I think he'd gone to take the run and then almost fainted back because he wanted it short. And maybe just sort of signs like that where you just think, okay, not quite there yet in terms of wavelength. But yeah, I think the fitness point is valid. Considering the circumstances, I thought he did okay. And I mean, the Shane Duffy equaliser, the now famous Shane Duffy equaliser, which I think in terms of hilarity is my favourite goal of the season. that stems really from Marcondes winning the ball and playing a brilliant forward pass to get Norwich up the pitch, which breaks Preston's shape. So, yeah, as you say, mixed. I think some good bits. I certainly expect him to get better and find some more gears, but it's going to be really interesting to see how Johannes Torp approaches that midfield this weekend, because, like you say, I think it's going to be one maybe that needs a slightly different mix to maybe what we saw on Tuesday night. So, does Marcondes fit into that? Do you turn to Forson? Do you turn to Schwartau? I think it's a debate that remains open, and that probably is going to be the case now, I think, until Marcelino Nunez returns, hopefully, for that Cardiff game in a week's time.
I think I'm back.
We've got you.
Yeah, I've been having issues a bit with this all lunchtime, so not ideal, but I'm back. So, yeah, I mean, the other sort of position, I suppose, where there's an injury at the moment, of course, it is Angus Gunn. George Long came under a little bit more criticism again on Tuesday night. I mean, maybe some fair, maybe some unjustified. Where do you sort of sit on that at the moment, Colin? Because it feels like maybe every mistake he makes is sort of put under the spotlight a lot more than maybe other goalkeepers. But he is the number 2, and that's kind of, he's had to come in because he is the number 2 because Angus Gunn isn't available. So do you feel it's a little bit unjustified at certain points?
Yes and no. I think we spoke about this a little bit on last week's preview show. I think so. Firstly, I think it's an incredibly difficult role for somebody to be in, first and foremost, as a player, because nobody wants to be that second choice in any position, and to be in a position where effectively, if all goes to plan, you don't play a single game in a season. That's ultimately George Long's role. If he's played a game in the Championship season, that means that Angus has got injured or something's gone wrong in terms of form or suspension or whatever. So the ideal situation for Norwich really is that George Long doesn't have to be called upon. So that's the first and foremost. Secondly, it's a very difficult role to recruit for, and supporters will remember a couple of years ago, we were speaking about Tim Krul in that position and Angus Gunn, and that created real uncertainty because there wasn't a clear number 1, and that was also really expensive in terms of wages for the football club, and it wasn't sustainable in the long term to have 2 goalkeepers of a really similar quality. So I think that's important context to add to this. I do look. I think if you had George Long here and he was speaking to you, he would tell you, the first goal obviously is rash, I think. And having watched it back, I actually think that Cordoba's on the cover, so I'm not quite sure he needed to lunge in with maybe what he thought he did at the time. But to be fair, as he makes that run, it's quite clear that Cordoba isn't then in the position. So I think as soon as you commit, you either have to win the ball or take the man, and he did that. The second one I think is an error. I think it goes straight through him. I think he should save it, is my view. But equally, I think you can focus on that and that's fine. But equally, there needs to be some focus as well for the mess really that happened before it, which was a poor pass, I think, from Shane Duffy into Kellen Fisher, who then lost the ball. Norwich are out of position. Their line's too high, and they get played through. So he doesn't have a great deal of protection in that moment. So I think we have to look at both of those. We have to look at, yes, George Long could have saved that effort, but equally the defence probably should have done a better job in terms of their work as well. So yeah, look, I think it's clearly a step down in quality, and that's inevitable because of the way that they want to run it at the moment, where you've got Angus Gunn as a clear, defined number 1. And then you have a number 2 who's not of a similar grade, and if that's what you're going for, then you need someone who's a good personality, who's a really good professional, who helps the group. So I do think when he plays, there is a real micro analysis on everything that he does, and everything that he does is put in the spotlight. Angus has conceded goals before that he should have saved, and they maybe haven't been highlighted to the same extent. So I do feel for him. The numbers around him aren't great, to be honest, in terms of the amount of goals that he's letting compared to the shots on target that he's faced. But as I said, it's a difficult role. It's difficult when you're coming in cold. It's difficult to build up any sort of momentum to hit the ground running, because you go from not playing to playing. It's not like sort of other positions where maybe you get a gradual run up in terms of substitute appearances and you build yourself up to that. It is, you're either not playing or you're playing as a goalkeeper. So it's a tough position. I feel for him. I don't think some of the stuff which I have seen is personal, is really acceptable at all. I think you can question him and criticize him from a footballing perspective, and that's fine. But it doesn't need to stray into the personal side of things, because I don't think it's helpful more than anything else. But ultimately, long and short of it, is that Norwich are going to need him on Sunday, and they're going to need him to hopefully produce some really good saves to keep them in game against a really tough side. So, yeah, it's a difficult role for him. Obviously, Norwich are waiting for Gunn to come back from that side strain and hopefully be fit and available again to play Championship football. And when that is the case, you'd probably expect him to come straight back into the team. So, needs must at the moment, but yeah, I think it was an error, at least one error, maybe even two errors, and I know people want to talk about the Stoke goal as well. So yeah, it's a tough role, it's a tough position to fulfill, and yeah, I think if he was honest, he'd maybe wish that it had gone a slightly better than what it has done so far.
Yeah, hopefully he can bounce back on Sunday, as you said. I mean, Tuesday was busy. We've spoken there quite a lot about the game. I mean, yesterday was busy for maybe different reasons off the pitch. Quite an historic day, probably in Norwich City's entire history. I mean, here we go, Delia Smith and Michael Wynne-Jones, of course, stepping down from the board. 20.
Michael looks good in that picture.
Yeah. 27, 28 years, of course, at the helm. Going to now be honorary life president of the football club. Mark Attanasio and his group, of course, going to step up. Connor, I mean, so it's a massive event. I mean, there's obviously been fair criticism at different points for Delia and Michael, but also, they're ultimately have always sort of, held the fans, the football club at sort of the centre of every decision they've made. I think they've probably been pretty good custodians of this football club throughout their tenure, and they deserve lots of praise as they exit the Carrow Road door in terms of the position that they currently held.
Yeah, completely agree. I think you only have to look at the outpouring of love and the messages and the support that they've got since last night's vote was ratified, really, to, I think, see how much they mean to this football club and what people value them as. And you're right, the reality is over 27 years, certainly in terms of in an era where there's been a lot of bad owners and there's a lot of people where, you question where the money is coming from in terms of morally, but also literally as well. There are some clubs that literally don't know who they're funded by or when, and there isn't that presence and accountability of ownership. So the fact that Norwich City have been run for nearly 30 years now by two people who are more or less at every game, definitely every home game, but most away games as well. The fact they're supporters, the fact that, after every game they go down, and we see them quite often actually, whilst we're sort of conducting post-match duties, they will come through the press room to go to the Lion and Castle, which again, they put their money, they put their hand in the pocket to really spend on that facility to make it a reality. They've been excellent, and we know they don't have the deepest pockets, and what that has meant for Norwich from a competitive perspective is debatable, and we could have that debate now, but I don't think at this moment in time it's the right moment to speak about that. I think it's right to speak about the people, and it's right to speak about the impact that they had on this football club. And I think what I always felt as somebody who's obviously followed the club for a long period of time is that considering the amount of clubs, particularly at Championship level, to put this in perspective, that really throw money at chasing the dream to get in the Premier League, to do everything. They risk the financial position of their club, some season on season, and some have ended up in really poor positions to do that. You look at Reading, you look at where Derby have been in recent years. I mean, they'd give their right arm to have the type of record that Norwich City have in terms of promotions and relegations and whatnot. But the fact that Norwich have done that in the financial model that they have is pretty remarkable. Actually, they've constantly and consistently during Delia and Michael's period in charge of the club punched above their weight in terms of finances, particularly in recent times. I mean, they beat Manchester City in that period. They almost unbeatable, invincible Manchester City, of course, quite famously in the season. Ultimately, they did get relegated in. But I think as someone who followed the club for a long time, they were evidence of swimming against the tide in football, which was about money, about wealth. They tried to do it differently. And look, we know the reality is ultimately it probably hasn't panned out in the way we all would have hoped in terms of a period of real sustained Premier League existence. But I think you look at the values that they have, the way that they have led this football club, the way they've delegated at times. I think it's been probably their biggest strength and maybe their biggest failure at points as well. The amount of trust and power they put into people who work at the football club, but they give people a huge amount of agency. And I think probably the biggest testament is if you walk into the offices at Carrow Road, you just hear words of positivity, and the environment that they've set there is tremendous. So yeah, we can have a debate maybe about the footballing aspects of it and the financial aspects of it, but I think today is about the people and those two. And obviously, it's not goodbye; they're not gone. There's still live presidents. They're still going to be at every home game. They're still basically going to run the director's box on a match day as well. But yeah, it's been a really, really good period, and it's one that I think in time, and well, maybe not even in time, maybe now, but definitely as time goes on, we'll get remembered with real fondness for the amount of time that they've had. And equally, it's now a step to a really different era where Norwich are going to be owned by people who aren't in the country, who aren't at every game, who aren't visible in the same way. So that presents slightly different challenges. And to be honest, there probably is a little bit of a sadness about that, because I think all in everyone's wildest dreams, you think about football not as how much money you are, not as how deep pockets a club has, or how much they can go and spend on players. It's about that purity, that romanticism that we have about football, which is dreaming about it, cup shocks and teams rising up the divisions and really good stories and narratives that we believe in. And that sort of feels like it's eroded a little bit. And so I think it is probably tinged with sadness in a sense that this represents maybe the way that football is shifting, that models and having owners like Delia and Michael is not really sustainable anymore from a financial perspective. So yeah, I think it is tinged with sadness in that aspect. But yeah, I think everyone of the Norwich City persuasion will have a huge amount of respect, love and appreciation for what Delia and Michael have done at this football club over 27 years in charge.
Yeah, you mentioned, of course, Mark Atanasio, him and his partners are now the new major shareholders of the football club. They're sort of, pretty well known now, I suppose, for the last sort of 2.5 years. It feels like certainly the last kind of year, there's been a bit of a shift in terms of their sort of, I suppose, influence in terms of decision-making. Ben Napper, Johannes Torp, we've obviously seen clips of them and sort of the latest documentaries being quite vocal in terms of their thoughts and feelings and sort of sharing different values with those within the football club. It's still going to be a massive test, though, to try and replicate or even go sort of, to certain levels to match what Delia and Michael have done, Connor. But obviously, they've got the financial backing, and it does feel like, obviously there's been a fresh era on the pitch a little bit, and obviously the, Ben Napper arrival and all these other various things. This feels like another key, milestone in that new era, and it's quite exciting, though, isn't it?
Oh, it's majorly exciting because it's the realities now of what's possible. I mean, I'm sure you saw and were involved in some of those conversations we had in the summer, where there was a reality at one stage that Norwich City weren't going to be able to spend any money on any players, and we're probably going to have to sell all of, if not most of, their prized assets. The fact that Mark Atanasio and his group stepped up and put money in made it a very different transfer window, probably to what we were expecting at the start of the summer, and maybe what the club was expecting as well. So I think there is excitement about what's possible, but it's not just having money. It's about aligning a strategy with that. And I think you can see what they're trying to do in terms of making it very data-led, which is what Mark Atanasio has done at the Milwaukee Brewers. And that is I don't know a huge amount about baseball, or hold my hands up, but they essentially, despite not being the biggest club and the biggest team, maybe even with the deepest pockets, they are perennially competitive in there. And I think pretty much, maybe someone will correct me, but pretty much always finishing the playoffs, which I spoke to Rob Butler at Radio Norfolk, who knows a lot more about American sports than I do. And he said that's basically the equivalent of staying in the Premier League every year. So that's not bad for a baseball club of that size. So yes, it's about the money and what's possible. It's not going to mean a splurge on players and £20 million, £50 million players arriving, but it gives Norwich a bit more financial backing to go and invest in the type of players that we've seen arrive this summer, projects and players who fit their strategy. And that should hopefully translate if and when maybe they get back to the top flight. They're then able to maybe approach it in a slightly different way to what we've seen in seasons gone by, where they can maybe spend a little bit bigger on players, the right players at the right time. But for me, the biggest thing is how they retain that connection, because that is part of what has made Norwich City so unique and probably feel quite unique at points, is that connection, that personality probably that Delia and Michael brought to it, that personable nature, that connection with fans. It's the bit that made probably Norwich City feel a little bit different to clubs who, a lot of clubs now are owned by wealthy American businessmen, business people. And it can feel not disconnected, that's too strong, but it is different, and it can feel different. But equally, if you get results on the pitch and Norwich see progress, then I think that can probably be smoothed over a little bit. So yes, it's about money, of course, and all of these conversations are always about money, but it's also for me about strategy and aligning the two, because as you say, we're not going to see suddenly a major departure from the way Norwich City have operated in the last few years. It's going to be similar, but with more financial backing. And I think that does create excitement because, as we've seen already under Johannes Torup, Ben Napper, if they can get the decisions right and they can use that money in the right way to make those decisions and get them in the correct place, then there is, I think, signs of progress and possibility at this football club, because you look at what they've done at Colney. We know that they'd like to in the future at some stage, when all the stars aligned, improve Carrow Road as well. If you could get this football club into that position with the fan base that it's got, with the geographical advantages that it's got, it could be a really significant, I think, a stable Premier League club, which is what everyone wants. So this is now, I think, probably a step closer, hopefully, to that becoming a reality.
Another step, of course, which we've spoken around a lot in probably the last week. Jack Wilshire confirmed yesterday his arrival, obviously, as a first-team coach as part of Johannes Torup's staff. We've spoken a lot about it, Connor, so we won't go into too much depth, but now it's confirmed. What does he bring to this kind of coaching department that we haven't already got? I mean, you spoke to Glenn Riddlersholm, of course, last night after the fan social event, and he spoke a little bit around Jack Wilshire and maybe being a bit more of an inspiration to them younger players. Of course, you look at his career. I know, obviously, injury maybe sort of blighted that a little bit in terms of what he could have gone on to achieve, but still an England international, a regular for Arsenal. You don't do that unless you've got something about you, and obviously done well as a coach at Arsenal under 18. So yeah, what can he bring that those currently in the building don't have?
Yeah, I think that's the first one, is what you touch upon, that probably experience of playing at a really high level and what that does for him. And I often think, particularly with kind of big name players, when they've gone into coaching, it gets overstated a little bit, because I remember very badly, but I was when I played at a very low level, when you were coached by someone who used to play, there is that instant respect and there is that sort of willingness to just open your mind a little bit more to what they're telling you, to try and grab onto every information. But ultimately, that has a shelf life. It only lasts so long, and then it's about the coaching ability and whether that is good enough to make you want to listen as well. So the Jack Wilshire's playing career and his experience will get him so far, and then it'll be about how good a coach he is, how good are his sessions, how good is the information that he's passing on to these young players, and that's when the better coaches who have played at the highest level are able to maybe relate those experience with the advice, with the sessions that they're putting on, I think, and utilize that in the best possible way. So he's a very different sort of dynamic. You look at the way Norwich City are at the moment: Johannes Torup, Glenn Riddlersholm, Nick Stanley, to the best of my knowledge. None of those guys had really playing careers at all. I have to check Nick Stanley off the top of my head, because now I'm second guessing, but I don't think he's really had a playing career. So what Jack Wilshire offers is real experience and high level experience from maybe aspects that are relatable to the players, and relatable to players in the sense that Johannes Torup and Glenn Riddlersholm can't offer. And not because they don't want to or they're not able to, but because they've not stood in the middle of a pitch in a Champions League game. They don't know what that feeling is like. They don't know what it's like as a young player to deal with injuries or pressure, or to be hyped up and then maybe not quite be able to live up to those expectations. Jack Wilshire does. He's been through that. He's walked that walk. So I think it's an incredibly exciting appointment. He's clearly at the start of his coaching career. He's only 32. There's going to be, for him, a lot of things to learn from a technical perspective about how to coach, and hopefully he can offer that. But clearly, and we saw Ben Napper's quotes yesterday, describing him as what they felt was one of the most exciting and brightest young coaching talents in the country. And you don't get that tag from someone like Ben Napper if you aren't a quality coach, and that is ultimately why Norwich City have pushed so hard to get him. And I think the final one I would say on him is, and it's a major positive for Norwich, but I think it reflects really well on Jack Wilshire as well. The fact that it would have been easy, I think, for him to stay at Arsenal, to be comfortable at that club where he's spent a lot of his life, where he's well regarded. He had a pretty comfortable job, let's be honest. The under-18s isn't one where, Norwich's under-18 coach, for example, isn't one that we speak about frequently, or isn't ever under a huge amount of pressure to deliver results, because they're maybe not as tangible to first-team supporters. So it's not an easy role, but it's a role that is relatively comfortable and relatively sort of behind the scenes. And he's given that up to step into a first-team environment at a club he's never been at before, to work with people he's never worked with before. That's incredibly brave. And I think it's a sign probably of his ambition and determination to make a real success of his coaching journey. And it's also a major testament to what Norwich are building as well under Napper and Torup, that they're able to attract someone like that to take that step out of somewhere that is really familiar to them. So it's a positive all round, I think. And yeah, I think we're all probably quite excited to see him as part of Yanisov Torup's coaching team and to see what he can offer, with obviously recognition that it's going to take a little bit of adaptation, I think, as was the case with Tony Roberts, the goalkeeping coach, and even Torup and Riddlesheim themselves.
Yeah, you are right on Nick Stanley. No playing career, just an intern at Bournemouth and then a long spell at Brighton before arriving at Norwich. Paul has mentioned kind of this home record. I mean, need 3 points on Sunday. One defeat. No defeats, of course, at Carrow Road. Then it will be a year if they do manage to avoid defeat against Middlesbrough. I mean, Connor, we've spoken a lot around this home record. It feels like it's been probably a theme now for it must be 3 or 4 months, and every time we say, if they can just get the win, it was going to be another, X amount of games at home unbeaten. To mark a year if they do manage to go unbeaten against Middlesbrough, I mean that's quite some record, isn't it?
It's tremendous. I think for any club at any level ever to go a year unbeaten at home would be phenomenal. And the reality is it's going to end at some point, and they're going to lose a game at Carrow Road competitively, and when that happens, it's obviously one that in many ways, not relief, that's the wrong term, but because it does build, I think it does build a confidence when you go on this type of run. But as you mentioned, when you keep mentioning it and it builds up and it builds up and it builds up, it can become a little bit of a barrier, I guess. But that doesn't seem to have been the case on this Norwich City squad. And I think the reality is, if you'd have said to any of us after that Blackburn game last year, probably even David Wagner himself at the time, that Norwich City would go nearly a year, or be one game from a year unbeaten 12 months on, I think we'd probably have asked you maybe to book a doctor's appointment. So it's incredible what they've achieved, and of course it spans seasons as well. And Wagner and his team deserve credit as well for what they've turned Carrow Road into, because I think before this run, I remember crunching the numbers at one stage, and the Carrow Road run since the return of fans from obviously the pandemic wasn't great at all. So what they've made Carrow Road into is a really enjoyable place to come and watch football again. And that's partly been done by what Yanisov Torup has implemented in terms of playing style, but equally in terms of results. There's probably more of a willingness and desire to come to Carrow Road, maybe even than there was 12 months ago when this record wasn't in place. So yeah, pros and cons to it. I think this is probably going to be one of the toughest tests so far, though, in terms of opposition. And yeah, if they can navigate it, then we can talk about what a tremendous record it would be, because I'd need to look, but I can't imagine there's many teams that have gone a year unbeaten for a significant period of time outside of maybe Manchester City and those at the top of the Premier League.
Yeah, notoriously, of course, the Championship very difficult to get any form of win in. It's such a competitive league, and given Norwich have faced Leeds twice or in that run, and sides that ultimately got promoted. Southampton, I know that game wasn't pretty, but they still managed to remain unbeaten in that game. Obviously, the East Anglian derby, we know sort of the sort of narrative that goes around that game. To extend it to a year would be quite something. You mentioned they're going to be a difficult test, Middlesbrough. Obviously a good win last night against Sheffield United. It was successive defeats prior to that. So it feels like they maybe got a little bit more momentum coming to Carrow Road. But I think we spoke around it a little bit yesterday morning at breakfast. Maybe the underlying data for Middlesbrough is actually quite positive. I mean, here's a little bit of a sort of flavour of the sort of recent form table, which maybe doesn't show that particularly, because Middlesbrough are down there in 11th. But I think they're third on average possession in the league. They have the most expected goals in the division, second most accurate passes. I think most touches in an opposition box of any team in the Championship. Obviously 2 years now under Michael Carrick, so it feels like maybe this could be a positive season for them. Level on points with Norwich at the moment, just one place below, of course, on goal difference. But all that data, Connor, I mean, they probably should be maybe in a higher position. Is it a little bit of a false position at the moment for them?
Yeah, completely for me, completely false. I look at, and you mentioned the expected goals. In terms of expected goals difference, which is, essentially the expected goals for minus the expected goals against, they're second in the division for that, behind Leeds United. So that we're talking about a real quality team in terms of their performance levels. And obviously then within that, as we know what football is like, there are outcomes aren't necessarily controllable, because you can create loads of chances but not take them. You can have a really clinical opposition. There's luck. There's all type of factors that means that you on a game by game basis don't necessarily translate that sort of data into results. But equally, as a general trend and a general rule of thumb, when you have really good consistent performance data over a season, you tend to do really well. And so they are a team that I expect to be up there in the Championship this season in terms of not just playoff contenders, but automatic promotion contenders. I think they're good enough for that. And you mentioned Michael Carrick, he's an excellent coach. I know he's come under a little bit of pressure recently because of their results, but I actually think you need to ignore that and you need to look at what they're doing and what they're producing and what their performances have been like. And I think they've won 3 of their last 5 actually, which is more than the Norwich have done. They've won 2 of their last 5 with 3 draws. So they're in a better place after the week. Obviously, they lost to Bristol City last weekend. So the positive is that there probably are aspects in there where perhaps they haven't quite settled yet. Perhaps they haven't quite been able to translate those really good performances into results, and that should, you would hope, present an opportunity for Norwich City on Sunday. But yeah, in terms of false positions, I think theirs is maybe one of the falsest in the Championship at the moment, because certainly on all the numbers, as you mentioned, and as I've thrown in, they should be well up there, and certainly on the evidence of the performance data are the second best team in the Championship on those metrics, not in terms of points, but we tend to see the two things correlate over a long period of time.
Yeah, I see a few comments and questions starting to flood through. We'll be live for another 10 or 15 minutes, so get any sort of last comments, questions, score predictions down below. Dan saying the home record was impressive, but my thoughts are, how do we translate this in terms of away form, which is of course not being great of late. I think it's 2 wins, 2 draws, 2 defeats on the road, which, they sort of say if you can get a point away from home and win your home games, it is a good recipe for Championship success. Norwich maybe averaging slightly above a point a game away from home, but obviously the home record I think is just below. But they played some tough teams at Carrow Road, so yeah, what could maybe cause this difference in results, performance levels, from home versus away?
Yeah, I think there's lots of factors. I think firstly, as a general rule, teams set up differently. They tend to be, not always, but they tend to be more ambitious at home because there's an expectation from their own supporters that they're a little bit more attacking, that they're a little bit more willing to have a go, and that ultimately affects what Norwich City are trying to do. I think we have seen elements of improvement on this front. So I think basically the first half at Stoke was really good. Block of evidence as to what they want to do away from home to try and dominate games and control games outside of Carrow Road. And I think actually probably and this is bizarre maybe because of the way the game was, and I think game state probably did come into this a little bit because we saw Preston put a lot of bodies behind the ball. But basically from when Norwich conceded that second goal to half time against Preston, I thought they were really good as well in terms of controlling the game and really limiting the amount of chances that the opposition gave them, but equally in terms of controlling the crowd and the atmosphere inside the stadium. So it's weird, and I think it's probably something that loads of people have tried to get to the bottom of over a significant period of time, which is why does home advantage, or why is playing at home an advantage? Because it's the same pitch, it's the same rules, it's often same ball, it's same shirts, it's whatever, but the only difference is where you're playing, and somehow it does create this massive difference. So I think you would expect the away form to always be a little bit worse than the home form, maybe beyond in special cases. And there's probably something wrong if that wasn't the case. But I think there are signs maybe that Norwich are beginning to get a little bit better on the road. And obviously not if they play like the opening 12 minutes against Preston, but if they can find a little bit more of the Stoke first half, then they'll be okay. And I think maybe that's probably the element so far that we haven't seen. We've seen really commanding, controlling, brilliant performances at home where they've swept teams away, Hull, Watford, etc. But we haven't seen that on the road yet. We haven't seen a real complete performance yet, and that feels probably like the next challenge for Johannes Torp. And they've got Cardiff obviously as the next opportunity to do that after we get through Middlesbrough.
Yeah, it feels like we've come a long way from the days of Dean Smith wishing we played away from home every week. PP saying, am I right in thinking that Long's last home league start was the last defeat at Carrow Road? I've just looked back. He definitely started the game against Middlesbrough, the 2-1 defeat last year, but it was Angus Gunn in goal against Blackburn. So, but obviously Long did have a sort of sustained couple of games there. I think it was the Leeds game. He was involved in that one, either the 3-2 defeat. So, he was sort of in that run. Connor, obviously, we'll dip into any more late comments or questions in just a moment, but are you expecting any rotation, any changes from Torp on Saturday or Sunday? Obviously, the game is Sunday for anyone listening. Obviously, we're going to get the press conference updates tomorrow, so we don't know, for definite if there's any injury updates or any other issues that might be around this game. But just as we are at the moment, could you see any, switches, I suppose, from that game on Tuesday night?
Well, it's midfield again. Is obviously barring any issues that we don't know about. I think it's midfield and how you go about setting that up in Nunez's absence. I think I could probably see Schwartau coming in for this one home game. I think it offers Norwich real legs, maybe compared to the other two options. I think it's going to be a game where they probably need some running and a real ability in the press to halt Middlesbrough. So I could probably see Schwartau for Marcondes maybe as the only change, unless obviously he decides to disrupt that back four after the other night. But I really don't get the sense that he'd be willing to do that. I think he was focused probably more on how they go about making improvements within their own structures and shapes, and maybe a little bit of miscommunication and misunderstanding about where exactly they need to position their lines rather than focusing on individuals and the errors that they made. So, yeah, I probably feel we'll see Schwartau in for this one, just because I think it's the type of game that will suit his capabilities. But other than that, barring any injuries at tomorrow's presser, that would be what I go with. What about you, Adam? Are there any other areas that you sort of think might be in consideration for switches and changes?
The only other one I'm intrigued by is Cade Gordon. Just think, the fact that he had another decent 45 minutes against Preston, it feels like maybe he's starting to build up his fitness. It'd be harsh on seeing that. So, of course, has maybe got a little bit of confidence after that goal at Stoke. And, wasn't at his best, particularly against Preston, but certainly another game at home, you'd feel, he's going to get plenty of opportunities to maybe try and grab another goal and continue to build that sort of, confidence within him. But then again, you've got Cade Gordon alone, and I've been quite impressed with sort of his shortish cameos. So maybe there's a debate there. I mean, people in the comments can obviously comment if they can see any other changes, but I'm with you. I think the midfield is probably the only position where maybe Marcondes is going to be tough for him, given his sort of levels of fitness and trying to build that to go again for sort of another 60-odd minutes on Sunday. I'd maybe expect Svartau, as you say, given it's a home game. I think there's probably a little bit more license for Norwich to have a little bit more creativity in that midfield, and he's certainly someone that I feel has got that. Bish asking, based on the switch round at Preston, do you think that we may be better playing a back three on the road? I mean, Heckingbottom actually felt that his side benefited from Norwich playing a three at the back after the game, which is intriguing. But given that Norwich obviously technically won the second half 1-0, if you want to go on that metric, and probably were much better in terms of their performance levels in the second half. But is that maybe something you could see Torrent trying to sort of, I suppose, debate it, moving forwards maybe to sort of future away games?
Not at the moment, because I think at this stage, when you're trying to build a style of play in a certain system, it's probably helpful to have a continuity to what you do initially. I think it's a really good option to have in your arsenal to be able to deploy if you need to. And I think what we saw on Tuesday night was, or certainly what it looked like to me was the plan, was because Preston, as Stoke did, and I think we'll see more teams do, but so many bodies in the middle of the pitch in that low block, because that's where Norwich want to have the ball. They want to control those central areas. So for me, it was about getting more width on to almost try and drag their shape open a little bit, to try and open some of the spaces that we saw Shane Duffy advance into. So even though maybe the change, I don't think, and I would agree with Heckingbottom to an extent, I don't think it really boosted Norwich City's levels of creativity in terms of pure chance creation. But I think it did have the desired effect in terms of offering them a little bit more space centrally, which is ultimately what they needed to get back into the game. And with hindsight, I think it's one of those where they had so much control and so much dominance in that sort of 10-15 minute spell before the halftime break that they probably should have kept with that for 10 minutes. But equally, it's nice to be in a position where we're talking maybe about a coach being a little bit too proactive rather than not being proactive enough. So I will always settle for that. So at this moment in time, I don't think so. I think it could become an option maybe if we have a spell, for example, where Norwich really struggle to pick up results. But I think when you're in this period of building and transitioning to something new, to then get 11, 12 games in and suddenly decide you're going to play a new system, that doesn't feel particularly wise to me at this stage, but definitely one that's good to have, and one that we've seen, I think, equally with Jack Stacey and Ben Cruzene, and in certain games where Norwich have needed to change it, be it chasing a goal or trying to protect a lead, where it has proved helpful at points to have that ability to switch and change, and one that can really catch opposition out as well. So not at the moment, but I think it is very much a watch this space on a free at the back.
Yeah, Adam said any chance he drops long for Mayer. I mean, Mayer never played at this sort of level, played, in sort of the lower depths of the English league, National League, had a decent loan spell at Morecambe last campaign, but it would feel quite the jump to throw him into a championship game, wouldn't it, Connor?
Yeah, I think so. I don't think from memory he's played a game above League Two, and he's not played many in League Two. So I think that, again, the message that sends, and it's not as easy as throwing a young one in. It's the ramifications of what that has for experienced ones and whatnot, and the message it sends to the group as well. So no, I don't really see that at all. If I'm honest, I think it'll be George Long again on Sunday, and probably until Angus returns.
Yeah, of course. Feels like it's got to that point in the show where maybe it is going to be score prediction time. I mean, Norwich they had a really good spell, didn't they, a few years back, where they seemed to beat Boro 1-0 every single time they played them. But just recently struggled a little bit more. I think they've not got a win against them in the last 4 successive defeats as well. There's been a few grim ones in that. Of course, the 5-1 at the Riverside the year before last. Last year's away game had a little bit of controversy about it, of course, with the Signs red card, which got overturned. So it feels like maybe Norwich are due a win. How do you see this one going, Connor? Norwich going to get, the big 3 points they require at home to maybe make this week look like a pretty good one?
Yeah, I think maybe barring Leeds, this might be the toughest test that they've had so far for all the reasons we've discussed. So a win would be fantastic, and I think it would really make what has been at this point maybe a week that people are feeling quite frustrated about. Certainly the players are feeling frustrated about, into one where you look back and go, actually, that was quite a good week. You've remained unbeaten. You've taken 5 points and done really well. I think this is going to be a really tight, close, tactically interesting game. I think it's probably going to be quite cagey, maybe not as open as some Norwich games that we've seen. But Norwich at home with a tremendous record, I think I probably back them to just about edge it. So I'm going to go for a 2-1 Norwich win, but not very confidently at all. What about you, Adam?
Yeah, I'm with you. I can see a pretty close, cagey affair. 2 pretty good sides in terms of data that I think will both be sort of pushing sort of the upper echelons of the Championship. I think Norwich may be progressing at a rate maybe unexpectedly a little bit. Even Riddersholm last night kind of said that in his interview, which you can of course watch on our channels now. And it feels like this is going to be all set up for a good game. I'm with you. Going to go for a 2-1 Norwich win. Yeah, just for the reasons that they're at home and they've got that sort of pride maybe of trying to make that record a whole year, which of course can be dangerous, and we sort of speak about it every week. And it feels like maybe Leeds, that might have been the moment they might have blew it, and they had a pretty good performance and got a good point that night. And even Watford, they've notoriously had some sort of big affairs with them at Carrow Road, which have ended it in the wrong scoreline for Norwich City. So to come through those sort of games in the fashion they did, yeah, I think they might just about do it. There's a few comments. Dan Mayhew saying, I'm going for another 2-2 draw, sadly, though hope to be proved wrong. He also mentions about Johannes Torp. It says one of the things I think is great from him, he can adapt unlike other managers we've had. I wonder if we can get Signs to play a little bit wider to drag players out to create more space in the middle, which of course would be beneficial, I suppose, to those playing more centrally. Joe saying, I think the thing is we're back at home. All the fans will be behind us. I think we'll get the job done. Obviously, Paul mentioned earlier on in the show that they need 3 points on Sunday, which of course would be hugely positive. Connor, just before we round off, there's obviously been lots of good content across our channels, I think probably in the last week or two. A couple of chats last night which went up. One, obviously, I've mentioned a few times with Glenn Riddersholm. We got a pretty good lengthy chat with him, a sort of long-form podcast in Austria, which anyone that's not watched it is probably still worth going back and watching that. But I felt the sort of 20 minutes from him last night was pretty good, quite reflective about, sort of the start that they've had, and obviously, mentioned maybe sort of ingraining himself into the culture of Norwich and enjoying the city and showing his family around and feeling at home here, and lots of other good stuff around Delia and Michael. Just want to sort of plug that for where people can find that.
Yeah, you can find it on the Pink and YouTube channel. There's links to it on our socials. There's a written piece that has gone up around Jack Wilshire. But yeah, Glenn's a tremendous character, isn't he? It was really, really good last night, actually. And yeah, well done to the Norwich City Fan Social Club for putting on, as they always do, a brilliant event, and brilliantly hosted by Darren Eady. There's a chat with him as well on our YouTube channel about Delia and Michael and whatnot. But yeah, he's a really good personality. I think he's someone that if you were a player, you would really develop quite a close relationship with. He's straight to the point, but in quite a comical way. And yeah, just a really good personality. And I think I'm fair to say, apart from maybe some headlines over under 21s that maybe he's not too fan of, because he wants to protect a lot of those young players, I think he's a big Pinkham fan as well. So yeah, I think we're all having a bit of Glenn at the moment, and yeah, go and watch that chat, because it's as you say, he's really informative and always really interesting and reflective to speak to. So yeah, on our YouTube channel, that's the best place to find that in full.
I'm assuming Kevin's comment is around my Wi-Fi, which is been pretty poor this lunchtime. Don't really know what's causing it, but some sort of bug in the system maybe. But hopefully you've all still be able to hear me loudly and clear, which is of course the most important thing. Although we do waffle on, so maybe not. Anyway, with that, we're going to round off the show. Of course, lots of good content on the channel as we mentioned there. Ridder's Home and Darren Eady both already up. I've got a chat with a Middlesbrough fan later on tonight, so that will be up on our YouTube channel, which of course will be well worth a listen to get a little bit more of an insight into the Middlesbrough camp and how they're feeling heading into this game. Of course, we'll be speaking to Johannes Hoff-Torp tomorrow lunchtime at Colney, so all the sort of latest injury news and all the sort of his insight in terms of that will be well worth checking out. Of course, we've got the WhatsApp channel, which you can, of course, go and subscribe to now, which, of course, is pretty good in terms of just getting content straight to your phone. We think it's a nice little introduction, sort of, in terms of our sort of content and social channels. Of course, got the app as well, which, good value for money. We feel lots of good content coming your way ahead of a pretty busy schedule now for Norwich. Obviously got one more international break, but then it gets into that sort of Christmas, December run, which of course is quite exciting. And I think the final plug is probably the YouTube channel, which I think we're only now about 140 subscribers away from 10,000. So if you're not already subscribed to our YouTube channel, then drop us a subscribe down below. Of course, like all the content. As per usual, Dan mentioning an Ethernet cable. To be fair, I do have one. I'm just having to work at the moment in my dining room because my office is currently under renovation. So once that's done, I'll have an Ethernet cable and hopefully this won't be so much of an issue. But unfortunately, I don't live a little bit more out in the country and my Wi-Fi is not great. But fibre has been installed down my road about a month ago. So I'm hoping to maybe switch over to that pretty soon. So maybe that'll be a huge benefit. Not that anyone
Game changer.
But there we go. Kevin saying, my mate is a Boro fan, so I want to see a 2-1 win. Dealer and Michael have done a great job. Never forget when I was with Dealer, she was nice and asked how my food was, etc. And I think that's probably a pretty common theme for anyone that you ask around Dealer and Michael and how generally friendly and sort of inviting they've been in terms of their nature. With that, we're going to sign off. Of course, we'll see you at Carrow Road on Sunday for the big one. Team news going to be up at 2 p.m. It is a 3 p.m. kickoff, of course, on a Sunday afternoon. The joys of Championship and TV scheduling these days. But yeah, it should be a good game. So well worth, of course, tuning in if you're not at Carrow Road. So with that, we're going to sign off. Enjoy the rest of your week. Enjoy your weekend. And we'll see you at Carrow Road.